this on? Hi, everybody. Whoa. It's like a really loud volume for my voice this early in the morning. Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to get started in the interest of keeping on time. But welcome to the first event for the Columbia Public Policy Review, SEPA's newest student group. My name's Jen Kim. I'm a first-year MPA student here at the school and one of the co-founders of this new organization. I came to SEPA this fall after working for 8 years in nonprofit consumer advocacy, mostly in California and New Jersey, working for US PIRG, which is a consumer advocacy group. So I had kind of, in my opinion, worked in the trenches for the last 8 years, doing a lot of door knocking and grassroots organizing, and came back to school to, kind of add to my repertoire of, what does it take to actually get good policy made and implemented. And so this fall, my friend John Olderman, who probably signed you in, who's sitting out at the table, he ran for student government president and lost. And so, I didn't mean that in a good, it's just a fact, it happened. But while he was running for president, one of the things that he ran on was really getting the SEPA student government to engage more in actual policy making here in New York City. We're one of the greatest cities in the country. City Hall is a half-hour subway ride away from campus. There he is. Sorry, John, I just called you out. Wave to the audience, John. When he was running for student government president, I said, that's exactly right. How come there isn't more of this happening in school? Because that's kind of what I knew as a student coming in. So unfortunately, it was unfortunate that John lost because he couldn't do this as student government president. But then I thought, well, why can't we still do these kinds of things? And so kind of myself, John, Caitlin LaCroix in the back also, and Will Colegrove decided to actually start a student group to kind of bring real-life policy engagement to SEPA, to engage the student body and kind of bring real issues to campus. And so this is our first event. Thanks for coming. We're very excited. We made it. We got it in before the first school year ended. So I wanted to give you the quick, here's what our group is up to. And so if you look in our program on the back, there's actually a description of some of the different activities that we're doing that we're excited about and are going to launch in an even bigger way in the fall. But there's lots of ways you can get involved with our groups other than coming to this event. We also are launching a policy blog focused on domestic issues. And so we welcome any members of the Columbia community as well as guests to submit blogs or even previously written policy memos for classes. We'll help cut them down to blog appropriate size. And that is at columbiapublicpolicyreview.org. Audrey Yu is our executive editor. I think, yes. Executive editor has helped to really drive that blog. We also have a podcast, which Michael Cedillo, where'd you go? There you go, right there in the hat, has spearheaded. So you can actually take out your phones right now and either on your iTunes or podcast app, type in SEPA Radio and start to follow our podcast. So everybody should do that before they leave. And you can also sign up for our email list. Also, really everybody will get signed up anyways because you're here today. But if you have other friends that might be interested in joining our group, it's also there. You can sign up for our list at columbiapublicpolicyreview.org. So just a word on today's event. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about how this event idea came about, introduce Professor Fuchs, who has really helped to foster our group and supported us a lot throughout the semester as we've developed this idea. And then we'll switch over to have Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer speak, and she'll join a panel of experts on paid sick leave to talk about that. But the idea of this event actually was just thinking about, we learn a lot in school about what it takes to make good policy, but what about beyond that? How do we actually implement good policy? I had the good fortune to be part of the 2008 campaign in California to bring high-speed rail to the state, the first high-speed rail in the country. And it was just a really great example to me of okay, this is a really good idea. How come it hasn't already happened yet? And the answer was mostly politics. And so, politics is, a broad word, but it mostly meant that, this is a great idea that a lot of countries and cities and other places have already implemented, and why wasn't it getting done? It wasn't on the merit of the idea. It was mostly on the implementation and the campaign process. So, we knocked on a lot of doors. We raised a lot of money. We worked with a lot of legislators. We had to do a lot of messaging to get the word out to people. Most people, when they heard about it, they thought it was a good idea, but most people just had no idea that it bill is happening. And there was also a whole process in California, there are two ways you can get a ballot initiative put on the ballot, and one is that the legislature can just do it themselves, but it takes 2/3 of the legislature, and then you also have to make sure that they put good language on. So that was a whole process into itself as well. So I thought, how can we pick a policy in New York to demonstrate all the different pieces of what it takes to get a good idea implemented? It was actually one of my professors, John Liu, who's former city comptroller, that gave me the idea to say, well, why don't you do paid sick leave and get Gale Brewer to come? So he's not unfortunately able to come today, but Gale, you can thank John Liu later for his idea. So with that, I just want to quickly introduce Professor Ester Fuchs, who's been my professor this whole year here at SEPA, and again, as I said, has done a lot of work to help support our organization, so we really thank her for that and want to recognize her. So give a hand to the professor for helping our group come to life. But Professor Fuchs is as a professor of international public affairs, she's chair of the Urban and Social Policy Concentration and the U.S. Specialization, which I am a member of both of those. For those of you that are not yet members of the U.S. Specialization, you should totally join. It only takes 3 classes, and it's a really great way to have another specialization added to your list. She's the director of who'sontheballot.org, which is an online voter engagement initiative that really helps New Yorkers learn more about their polling place and who they're voting for, and how to get the tools to be able to vote. But she really is not just an academic. I think Professor Fuchs is such a great person to have here at SEPA because she's a combination of both the academic and the politics. So Professor Fuchs worked for Mayor Michael Bloomberg from 2001 to 2005 as a special advisor, and she really helped to kind of implement and restructure the city out-of-school time program and helped to streamline a lot of important social service programs. She's also an expert on fiscal policy as the author of Mayors and Money, Fiscal Policy in New York and Chicago, and we're very honored to have her come today to introduce Gale Brewer. So thank you.
So normally I don't interject myself into student-run events, and I just like to sit in the audience and kvel, as the Jewish mothers say. And so I'm doing that today also. I hope you don't mind. But it's great to see everybody here today. We're starting finals and end of semester, and we have a fabulous turnout, and I think this is really a watershed moment at SEPA to have students organize an event around this very, very important issue of getting paid sick leave in New York City and focusing on it from a politics of policy perspective, which, as everybody knows, is one of my passions in teaching, as well as in life. We need to understand that to get anything done. And this is an amazing example of how to move a very important idea that many people thought was important for a long time, which had all kinds of complicated opposition, and actually get it into real legislation and implement it in a way that even the opponents view it as a success now. And there are many people who will speak today who will tell you exactly how that process worked. I know a little bit about it myself, but we'll leave that for another day. So it's really my honor and pleasure, and Gale, you have to know that I asked for this. So to introduce Gale Brewer, the 27th Manhattan Borough President. And we're just delighted to have her here at SEPA and at Columbia, and I know she'll be back again in other contexts because of her just great commitment to making sure that we educate the next generation of public sector leaders in this country, not just in this city. What you already know about Borough President Brewer, she served on the City Council for 12 years. She ran the New York City not-for-profit project at CUNY. She worked in the affordable housing field, was a deputy public advocate, was director of Mayor Dinkins' federal office of New York City. That's partly why you're so good at politics, right, Gale? She actually understands intergovernmental relations. She was the executive director of the Mayor's Commission on the Status of Women, and she was the chief of staff of the West Side Council member Ruth Messenger, who was also a borough president of Manhattan. Gale received an MPA degree from Harvard's Kennedy School. We don't like to mention that here. But she also received her undergraduate BA from Columbia University. And she's sharing with us for the next 2 years a member of her staff who will also be introduced eventually. Now, I just want to say 2 more things about Gale. There's so much to learn from her, and so pay attention. There won't be an exam, but I might test you in the hallways. And you better be able to tell me what you learned. Gale has mentored her staff and countless numbers of young people. She works harder and smarter than anyone I know. And I have to say that again, harder and smarter, because it's not enough to just work harder. You have to be smart at what you do, and she is. She's generous with her wisdom. She's a true leader, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Gale Brewer, the 27th Manhattan Borough President.
Thank you very much, Professor and friend Esther Fuchs, for many things. One thing Esther did for me, which she wishes she hadn't, which is that when she was at City Hall, she kindly let me teach her urban studies class at Barnard College. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life because Emma Wolfe was in it. And Emma Wolfe now runs the city of New York. The mayor thinks he does, but it's really Emma Wolfe. So next time she won't do that. Thank you, Esther, very much. And thank you, Jen Kim, and thank you, Will Colegrove, for being a colleague and a friend. So I cannot thank you enough because I don't believe that any of us in this wonderful panel, this panel is phenomenal, have had the opportunity to get together since the bill actually passed and to discuss it. It was a nightmare for 4 years. I mean, I still have nightmares. Nightmares of a room with Sherry and Allison and me and council staff with no windows, junk food, days and days and days. I mean, days. And I have nightmares. So what might come out of this as a suggestion is to literally take, Kennedy School does this, you do this, B schools do this, literally a case study. Put some time into it, maybe as part of the public policy effort, because nobody, to the best of my knowledge, has done that, and it might be something that could be done and used around the country. So what I'm going to do is just talk for a few minutes because the panel is much more interesting. But just to give you a timeline, and then throw in some specifics that haven't been discussed before, but mostly the discussion about the bill. I think we can all agree that paid sick days make sense, and we'll talk more about the specifics of the bill. But just to give you a timeline, August 20th, 2009, until I remember on paper, I forget because it really was so challenging. 2009, the first NYC Paid Sick Time Act was introduced at a meeting. Now, this is all thanks to a better balance. It gives the importance of a nonprofit law firm that has been working on these issues, worked on it in other locations. You'll hear more from Sherry in a minute. She's a hero of astronomical proportions in changing for the better people's lives in this country, and she'll talk more about it. And it came about, I believe, and I could be corrected at the panel, because a nurse in a parochial school in Queens, not a public school, brought this issue to better balance attention. And the notion was, of course, kids were lining up because the parents couldn't take time off to bring them to the proper doctor because they too had to work. And so it was actually a nurse in a school who started the discussion. November 17, 2009, we had our first hearing in the Committee on Civil Service and Labor. This was under Speaker Quinn, who was adamantly against the legislation. So even putting together, you hear more, these hearings was a frightening experience. Because if you were a business and you testified at this hearing, maybe you would get fines and fees the next day. We didn't know. We didn't know about retribution. The mayor was against it, the speaker was against it, and so every push could involve a challenge for anybody who was supportive. In 2010, in March, we reintroduced the bill because we could see there were changes that needed to be made, and so we made changes to the bill. We had a second hearing in May 11th, 2010, with amendments. We had a third hearing on March 22nd. Each one of these hearings was a major challenge. We have press conferences every single week. We had a guy, a puppet with sniffles, and he showed up at every press conference. We got sick of him. We're so glad we were able to send him to a resting place, although he might still be in somebody's closet, I don't know. He's on, okay, he's around. And then we had to think every single week between all these hearings about what is the next hearing going to be. So we asked the frightened business leaders to show up. There's still a couple women who actually pay, as restaurant owners, paid sick days. They showed up. They are heroes. Labor was phenomenal. Even though many of their workers get paid sick days, labor came over and over and over again. Then you had the clergy. We begged the clergy. We had them. We had nurses and more nurses and more nurses. We had doctors, but only the doctors that were a part of a union. You couldn't get the hospital to go near it. Don't forget you had the speaker and the mayor against it. No hospital ever showed up, even though you'd think that they would benefit. So it was only doctors who were part of SEIU. We tried to get, there was no person left, parents. You bring your child to school, the kid next door has sniffles, your kid gets it, we tried that. Every single week, freezing cold, people almost passed out when it was hot. We had to take one person, ended up passing out, had to go to the hospital. We had so many press conferences that it got to be a joke. No end to the topic, no silly, nothing could be silly, nothing could be, no, anything was on the table to have a press conference on this topic. At the same time, all of this is going on. Behind the scenes were the negotiations. Again, I'm collapsing a lot of time with labor, with a better balance than the attorneys. And I have to say, a terrific staff in the Speaker's office who were sitting there like mummies, kind of, because we would give them information and then they would draft it and Better Balance might change it because they really weren't supposed to be doing this, but they were supposed to be doing it because the council member was requesting it. So it was that kind of back and forth that really, unless you were there, you couldn't quite believe it. That, of course, finally, again, this is collapsing time, the bill passed the city council. I cannot tell you how challenging that was. Very, very close. And then, of course, the mayor vetoed it, and we had to override the veto. Now, at the same time, all of this is going on. When we couldn't get the bill out of the committee, because it was a committee that wasn't necessarily supportive, every single person was counted. They were on a big sheet, a secret sheet, but they're all on a chit sheet. Who's for it? Who's against it? Who's in between? If we found somebody had a distant relative, I'm making this up a little bit, but we weren't that far off, who might be a doctor somewhere in the universe, we would call up that distant relative and try to get them to lobby the council member. We tried everything. That didn't always work. But at one point, we tried to implement something that had never been done before because it's so controversial, which is basically a piece of legislation that council members sign to bring a bill out of a committee. Now, you're not supposed to do that because then the speaker could really be upset with you. So we were ready to go. We had signatures. People would crawl, cry, drag in to sign this piece of paper. I think we shredded it because in the end, we didn't need it. But the notion of a certain number of council members, I think there was 26, signing a piece of paper that would be contrary to the speaker when your whole life could end up in the ditch as a result was hard. My name was right up front because I was already way out there. And there were some others who really believed in the issue because the issue is one to be believed in. But just to give you a sense of, this concept of what it takes to implement something was what happened. So, got overridden. Other thing that helped, campaign. There was at this time a campaign going on for mayor. And to the credit of Mayor de Blasio currently and also John Liu, and others who were running, to be honest with you, against Speaker Quinn, they brought it up every single second. I mean, it became the mantra, not thanks to us, but for whatever reason, this issue, certainly we pushed, and labor helped. Labor helped a lot, but the issue was the press. It could have been, pre-K. It could have been some kind of housing issue. Affordable housing was not discussed. Pre-K wasn't a topic of controversy. It was this issue. And so then the public started, sort of rating people on whether or not they supported paid sick days. So in the end, Mayor de Blasio wins. And to his credit, our bill had a certain number of employees, 15 employees, 20 employees, depending on the year and so on. We had tons of incremental discussions and possibilities for this or that. And to the credit of Mayor de Blasio, in 2014, the council passed a new bill, but basically thanks to Sherry and Allison and Emma and many others, Shula Warren from our office, the bill had basically been worked out. Hundreds of meetings. What is the agency? Does this group in? Does this group out? And so on. All the specifics, so that the number of employees went down to 5 or more. You're covered, period, end of discussion. And the agency would administer it, and this is how they would do it, and so on. So I always say, but I say jokingly, that we took all the hell and de Blasio got all the credit. But the fact of the matter is he did make a big difference, made it clear, made it simple, and it's the kind of bill that we wanted in the first place. We just weren't able to negotiate it. So I think we should definitely go to the panel, but I just want to say that this is an exciting moment to be here today because, as I indicated, we've not gotten together in any kind of a meaningful way except to celebrate and drink. But we haven't gotten together to say this is what happened and to sort of suggest ways that perhaps a case study could be developed, because there are a lot of lessons to learn. Some mistakes, that could be not made in the future, and then some ideas. This is a true discussion of what it takes to implement policy. Obviously, you have to win, but this showcases a real advocacy campaign from problem to solution, research to messaging, and all the messaging was much discussed and extremely well done. And then the inside to outside games, which Allison knows how to play. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gale. You never disappoint. I forgot to mention that Gale Brewer is my hero. We'll just leave it at that. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and first call up members of the panel. Will Colegrove is a first-year MPA candidate. I like that. Soon to be graduate, one more year at SEPA here. He's had several years of experience in state and local politics in New York. And not surprising to anybody here, he's working for the Manhattan Borough President as Director of Legislation and Budget. And thank you, Gale, for sending Will up to Columbia to SEPA. He's been instrumental with Jen and Caitlin and John in founding what I had hoped we would be able to do here, a Columbia Public Policy Review. And so it's my pleasure to call up Will, who will moderate the panel and introduce the panelists.
Thank you very much. Yes, panelists, please join us at the table here. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone who came out here. We know it's finals and early in the morning, so I really appreciate everyone being here. I also want to give one more thank you to Professor Fuchs for introducing our keynote speaker, the Manhattan Borough President, and to the entire urban and social policy concentration staff who really have been so instrumental in getting this group started and getting this event organized. In addition, I want to thank our other co-sponsors, the United States Specialization, as well as SEPA Women in Leadership. And finally, last but not least, my co-organizers from the Public Policy Review, Jen Kim, Caitlin LaCroix, and John Olderman. Thank you all so very much. Now, again, we wouldn't be here without this amazing panel, so let me introduce our panelists. We have Allison Hirsch, who's the Political Director of Local 32BJ of the Service Employees International Union, which represents 145,000 property service workers in 11 states in the District of Columbia. 32BJ is the largest private sector union in the country. She's been working for 32BJ since 2007 and became political director in late 2010. In 2008, she served as Ohio State Director for the Change to Win SEIU campaign to elect President Obama. And prior to joining the union, Allison served as Chief of Staff to New York State Assemblyman Vito Lopez and as the Policy and Legislative Director for the New York League of Conservation Voters. Allison also serves on the boards of A Better Balance and Avoda, the Jewish Service Corps. She was raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and has a degree in religion from Columbia University. Next, Sherry Leiwant, co-president of A Better Balance. From 2005 to 2006, Sherry was an adjunct professor of law at the CUNY School of Law, teaching an upper-level class on civil rights. From 1996 through 2005, she was a senior staff attorney at Now Legal Defense and Education Fund, running the State Advocacy Project, working on issues from women's rights and poverty, including reproductive health, violence, and childcare. Prior to joining Now, she spent 12 years as a senior staff attorney at the Welfare Law Center, a national legal organization doing litigation and public advocacy on a variety of income support issues around the country. Prior to that, she was a staff attorney at the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. Sherry graduated from Princeton University and from Columbia University School of Law. She has 3 children and has served on the boards of Bank Street College of Education and Basic Trust Infant and Toddler Center. Next to her is Emma Woods, who's a senior associate at Berlin Rosen, advising the firm's New York public affairs clients on developing their message, shaping the news, and impacting policy. In addition to leading the communications work for paid sick days, Emma worked on the campaign for universal pre-K in New York City and assists the ongoing effort to bring paid family leave to New York State. Emma's other clients include the Brooklyn Public Library, the Urban Justice Center, and Citizens Committee for Children. Prior to joining Berlin Rosen, Emma honed her communication skills with the New York-based Women's Media Center, where her work included managing social media, blogging, and organizing media trainings. Previously, Emma was a freelance editor in the Netherlands and a communications and editorial contributor for the Aletta Institute for Women's History in Amsterdam. She attended Hamilton College and was recently named one of City and State's 40 Under 40 Rising Stars. Now, Emma, I have to say, you're the only one of our panelists not to have attended one of the schools at Columbia University, but we promise we won't hold that against you. So, as Professor Fuchs mentioned, in full disclosure, I do work for one of our panelists, Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer. It's been an absolute privilege to work for her, and I was very lucky to play a very small role in the passage of the paid sick leave legislation we're discussing today. So all of you in the audience have a program with some basic information on the bill we're discussing today, but just to help set the stage. So the paid sick leave law originally was Local Law 46 of 2013, required that businesses, as Gale mentioned, with 15 to 20 employees provide 40 hours of paid sick leave per year. Smaller businesses with fewer workers were required to provide 40 unpaid hours, but couldn't punish workers for taking paid sick leave. While this sounds like pure common sense, especially to many of the international students in the audience, the debate over this bill was one of the most heated legislative debates in the City Council. It had major ramifications in the race for mayor, and the eventual winner of the mayoral race, SEPA alum Bill de Blasio, has, as Gale mentioned, expanded the number of workers covered so that employers of more than 5 employees must provide paid sick leave. So this has been obviously an amazing journey. I think for most of us it's common sense, but I'd love to hear from other panelists, starting with Allison. Can you please just share a little bit more about your organization, how you got involved in this campaign, and sort of what your goals and strategy were for advancing this legislation?
Sure, good morning. So before I start, I just want to say, as a graduate of the college, I was very excited to be invited to speak today, so thank you very much. I sent the flyer to my mother. She was also excited. So 32BJ, as Will mentioned, 32BJ represents property service workers across the East Coast. So that's, if you think about New York City, all the residential, all the doormen in New York City, all the porters, supers, all the security officers and cleaners at Columbia, and across the state. So our members are predominantly our service sector workers, predominantly immigrants. 60% of our members come from different countries, speak 25 different languages, and we are a union that sees our mission as not just representing our own members, but also organizing all low-wage workers. And so we got involved in the paid sick leave campaign originally, actually, because our members, before it even came to our attention, our members came to the union and said, this campaign is starting, we want to get involved. And it was one of those moments when almost all of our contracts, some of the new ones were getting there, but almost all of our contracts at the time had paid sick leave in them. And it was an eye-opening experience for the leadership of the union to realize that our members were proactively coming to us because they were going to meetings run by community organizations, et cetera, around this bill. And they were saying, this is important to my sister, my mother, my neighbor, my cousin, my friend. Even though I have paid sick days, I think the union should be engaged in this fight. And so we started getting involved in probably 2010 or so, I think. And then as the campaign went on, became more and more engaged in the steering committee efforts, and I think working as a member of the Working Families Party to really think about how we could make paid sick days an electoral priority and issue going into the 2013 elections. And then we can get to this later, and then as the borough president mentioned, when the very brave members of the City Council Progressive Caucus and others agreed that they would be willing to sign a petition to discharge and call the speaker's leadership completely into question. And basically, I think if it hadn't happened already, completely make it impossible for her to win an election for mayor because they would start a revolt on the floor of the City Council under her leadership. We ended up, because of our relationship with the speaker, working very closely with Sherry and Gale and being part of the negotiations. So that's a little background on how we got involved, and it was probably, when I think, the most exciting campaign I've ever been involved in. So.
Sherry?
Yeah, I also want to thank you for inviting me to be here today. As Gale said, I mean, once you're involved in a campaign like this, you're kind of bonded for life, and so it's great to be here with all my friends to kind of talk about what happened. We haven't really debriefed in that way before. About 10 years ago, a few of my colleagues and I at now Legal Defense and Education Fund founded A Better Balance, which is a legal advocacy organization. We kind of saw work-family issues and the idea that women were in the workplace, but the world hadn't changed, the work world hadn't changed, as the next really big issue in feminism, but it wasn't being addressed, at least not by any particular legal organization. And so we founded A Better Balance. The other thing that was going on then 10 years ago was this discussion about opting out, women opting out of the workplace because the workplace was really not very friendly to family responsibilities. But it was being talked about in ways that really pertain more to upper income women, middle class women. And the fact of the matter is the hardest challenges were coming to low-wage women in the workforce who really had to work, couldn't opt out, but the workplaces were just as bad, much worse even for them. And the fact that 40% of working Americans didn't have paid sick days was really kind of shocking, and even more couldn't take time off to take care of their kids. So with women in the workplace, paid family leave and paid sick days became a really big issue for us as well, along with discrimination issues like equal pay and pregnancy discrimination. I was fortunate enough, the first paid sick days law that passed was in San Francisco in 2006 by ballot initiative. And in January of 2007, a group of advocates was convened in Wisconsin by the Ford Foundation to talk about the issue and to talk about whether there could be a national movement around this. I was fortunate enough to be the only lawyer in the room. It was right after ABB was founded. And so I really became the person who was doing the legal work around these campaigns, and that was really exciting. There were a number of places where campaigns were started. Actually, in New York, and I just want to give credit where it's due, it was really started when Bill Lipton, who was one of the heads of the Working Families Party, came to us and said, can we do paid sick days in New York? And I did a legal memo that's actually to him I believe it was 2007, concluding that we could. I mean, there are legal issues as to what New York City can and can't do. Minimum wage is something we can't do right now, although people are trying to change that. But my conclusion was we could do benefits and we could do paid sick time. So we took that then to the speaker, to Speaker Quinn, and to her legal staff, and spent about a year really answering questions back and forth. It was kind of like, you know, Sisyphus. I mean, every time we would answer a question and say, yes, you can do, that's not a problem, we'd get another one, and one of our staff attorneys and I just spent about a year answering those questions. And finally, in March of 2009, Laura Popa, who was alluded to as one of the speaker's staff who really worked very hard on this, came back and said, okay, fine, we don't see any legal problem. So it was at that point that we really started to organize, and at the same time, we went to Gale, and I don't know if Gale remembers this, but we thought we should wait, that we weren't quite ready to roll this out. So the story about the nurse is really about the swine flu H1N1 epidemic and what happened then. And so there was a lot of talk about public health and a lot of talk about people who didn't have sick time. And so I think that moved our timetable up. And so that's my recollection, that we then decided that we would roll it out sooner than we had originally intended. And there was a lot of from the get-go, there was a lot of consideration of what the political ramifications were. I just want to mention this because I think having Working Families Party engaged was really important. And they were engaged from the beginning. We rolled this out with a lot of co-sponsors. I think that was really important. And having the political help and the help of the unions was extremely important in getting that done and getting people on board, because it was still kind of a newish idea. You know, as Gale talked about, I mean, it was really a 24/7 process for almost 4 years, and having a really strong coalition that included public health people, that included the unions, that included some women's rights groups was critical, and we put a lot of energy behind it. I think, though, that having the political intelligence of people like Allison and people like Gale was really essential. And I just want to mention that Gale, I think Gale must have met with almost every business person in New York City trying to figure out what their perspective was. That was a real privilege to watch Gale work, because she really cared about hearing from people and listening. And I went to a lot of those meetings, and I don't know how many people we convinced, but I think it was a really great process, and I think in the end it was really helpful. I hope you agree. Anyway, we continue to work around the country on this issue, and there are more and more of these laws passing every day, really. So it's been great.
And Emma, can you tell us a little bit how Berlin Rosen got involved in this effort, and sort of maybe just a little bit about sort of what role communications plays in building a coalition around an issue like this?
Sure. So Berlin Rosen has worked with Family Values at Work, which is a national network of local and state coalitions working to pass paid family leave and paid sick days laws across the country. We worked with them for about 5 years, so that's how we came to work with Sherry and Allison and Gale and the rest of the New York City coalition. Like Sherry said, these laws are passing every day now. Last year alone, 9 cities and 2 states passed paid sick days laws. There are campaigns that Family Values at Work is working on in 21 states across the country. So we're lucky enough to be able to work with a lot of progressive issue campaigns, everything from raising the minimum wage to bringing paid sick days and paid family leave to bringing universal pre-K. And so I was lucky to work with these women here, and have to thank you for putting together a panel of 4 women. It's very nice to see also. So to speak about the role of communications in the legislative process, I think, to put it simply, it really builds public and then political will. So and maybe my panelists will agree with me, but I think at the beginning there was sort of an apathy about covering this issue in the media, about believing that this was something that was of urgent importance. So in order to build that kind of public outcry, you need to show the stories of people who are impacted by this bill. So being able to put a human face on what is otherwise another bill on a city council docket, and to be able to keep that on the front pages and keep that in the newspapers in every borough across the city and in the diverse media spectrum of New York is really the way that you get voters to care about this issue. And we've seen now in New York City and across the country that this is something that voters are willing to stake their vote on. It's something that is a winning issue for elected officials and candidates for office. And once these elected officials and candidates for office see that this issue is everywhere, that it's something their constituents and voters care about, then it creates that will to get this done and the sense that there would be political ramifications if they don't get it done. So I think I would really say that being able to get the faces and voices of impacted people in the media and build that kind of understanding among people who maybe take for granted the fact that a paid sick day for a low-wage worker can mean the loss of groceries for a month, can take someone who's on the edge and push them over it into financial ruin. Creating that understanding citywide and making people really care about this issue and be willing to stake their vote on it was, I think, pretty key.
Great. So I think from what we've heard here, it seems like, again, this sounds like such an important issue. This makes so much common sense. So Gale, what were your initial conversations like with your council colleagues on this? What were the concerns you heard most often?
Well, Allison was right. There was a progressive caucus, and they were kind of the bedrock, although not all of them signed on, if I remember correctly. I can remember exactly who signed on and who didn't.
Me too, Gale.
But they were, I think Brad Lander in particular, they were very helpful because they gave us kind of, if you're in the progressive caucus, you should be for something like paid sick days. So that was the bedrock. And then there were some others who may not be in the caucus, but who supported it. But I have to say, trying to convince others to get to a majority, particularly for override, you're always looking for what is the number that we need, and I believe it was 36, I can't remember. 36 is a number for an override. So we had to constantly be cognizant of the fact that if we have to do the override, we have to get to 36. So the original conversations were how many would show up at a press conference, as an example, that Berlin Rosen or others organized. That was indicative. And all of a sudden, you'd see some lone person walking in. Oh, my God, they've never been to this press conference before. This is so exciting. So they wouldn't say they were supportive. They'd just show up. And we'd be so excited. Literally, every single person was important. And that's what continued. Now, I want to echo Sherry's comment on how helpful working families was, because don't forget, as we are doing this campaign, it's not just a campaign for mayor, it's a campaign for the city council. And so Working Families Party, and I'm sure the unions, I wasn't privy to all the discussions, and this is where you get into the stuff that you don't talk about too much. But the Working Families Party and others who endorse and who support paid sick days in a very stressful time in terms of campaigning would endorse people who supported paid sick days. It was almost a litmus test. It was a litmus test. And so some new members who were challenging current members might get, I can't remember all the details, but they might get a supportive nod from the unions and the Working Families Party, or the incumbent might have to change his or her interest in the bill, because if not, he or she wouldn't get support. That's the real deal that goes on. So between the H1N1, which was the beginning to the campaigns, I guess we were lucky. We always would joke, we need another flu. Can't somebody find a flu? Because then we would have more interest. Otherwise, nobody in the public believed us that we had a problem. You know, everybody thinks that everybody has paid sick days, and they don't. So those were some of the ways in which we approached the council members, politically, hard-hitting, but also talking to them about the positive aspects of what the bill meant.
So there's our policy window for all the Dorian Warren alums in the room. So Allison, can you elaborate a little bit more about sort of the political climate at the time? Sort of what was, again, we've heard about there's a campaign going on, obviously not just for mayor, but for council. Sort of what role, how was the union thinking about this from a political context, and sort of what was the climate like at the time?
So I think the only time I've ever cried at work was around 32BJ's mayoral endorsement, because it was such a challenging, it was such a challenging political dynamic. I think 22 seats on the city council were up, if I remember correctly, because of term limits. It was a huge turnover in city council members. It was the first time in 12 years we had the opportunity to really elect a Democratic mayor, and the race was in the primary, not the general. And the candidates for mayor were all friends of labor unions to a different extent. And so it was an incredibly charged political climate. I think what the paid sick leave campaign did effectively was understand 6 months, 9 months, a year out, a year before the rest of the city started paying attention to the elections, that it was going to be a politically charged climate. And so a year, in 2012, the campaign started thinking, okay, we know that a year from now, all anybody's going to talk about is the elections. So how do we make sure that the only issue, or that the first issue people talk about when they think about the elections, is do you or don't you support paid sick leave? And so we started, I think there were like 40 different mayoral forums in 2012 and 2013. Honestly, it was really painful. But every single one had questions about paid sick leave. Every single one. And so by, I think, March of 2013 is when we ended up in negotiations. But by the time we went to the city council and back to the council, and Gale sort of led the rest of the members to sign the petition to discharge, the council members had some cover because they had witnessed, probably in March there had already been 25 mayoral forums. They had witnessed at every single mayoral forum the speaker getting beaten up for not supporting paid sick leave, the public advocate de Blasio and John Lee getting celebrated for supporting sick leave. And so they understood that they had support, so that if the speaker tried to go after them and take away their member items or move them to a crappy office or whatever, that there were unions and community organizations and folks that the speaker cared about in different ways who would back them up. And so in the end, what ended up happening was, as I mentioned before, I think we had 13 or 14 members already on the petition to discharge, and the speaker's staff found out. And the reality was 32BJ, I think you may or may not know this, 32BJ ended up actually endorsing Speaker Quinn in the primary. And we had a very good working relationship with the speaker. And when she found out that that the council members were gonna submit the petition to discharge, force the bill out of committee, force a vote on the floor of the council, her staff called us and said, okay, I'm ready to do the same paid sick leave bill that passed Connecticut. And so Connecticut has a paid sick leave law. It covers, it was the first state that ever passed paid sick leave. It was the first state for about 4 years. But it only covers businesses that are 50 employees, have 50 employees or more. As the first state, it was an important step forward, but we didn't want to do that in New York. We wanted to cover businesses with 5 employees or more. And so she called 32BJ, she called my boss, President Figueroa, and said, I'm ready to do this. We'll pass Connecticut. And Hector said, we don't speak for the coalition, we're members of the coalition, and Connecticut's not good enough. And so she called back and said, okay, I'm willing to negotiate if you guys do the negotiations, because I trust you, we'll do the negotiations. Hector went back and said, and then we went to the coalition and said, guys, this is what's happening, the speaker's calling us, et cetera. So we went back to the speaker and said, we're happy to negotiate with a couple of conditions. One, the entire coalition needs to vote on anything that's agreed upon. We will not stand up as 32BJ and celebrate a bill for paid sick leave if the rest of the folks who've been advocating and fighting for this for the past 4 years don't think it's good enough. Because bad coalition. For anybody who ever works in coalition, that would be bad coalition politics. But because our members have paid sick leave, right? So we're doing this. And two, we need the experts in the room. Sherry needs to be in the room. And obviously Gale would have been in the room anyway. Nobody would negotiate this bill without Gale. And so that became the condition. And they, pushed back, and we're like, fine, the council members will. You always need leverage in politics. And so council members will submit the petition to discharge. And so that became, that was the beginning of, 6 weeks of very intensive negotiations that included Sherry on vacation in Rome and sitting in her bathtub of her hotel room at 3 a.m. Italy time on a call with council from city council negotiating language. It was entertaining. But I will say, sort of going back very quickly to the political climate, we did internally in the union, and this is something that we haven't really talked that much about, have very clear conversations about what does it mean for us to be in a position where we're negotiating this kind of legislation with the speaker when she wants our endorsement and she wants our support. What does that mean when it comes to the other candidates? Does it have, it clearly had an impact. It was in our endorsement. It was not determinative. It didn't determine our endorsement, but it was definitely a challenging, charged moment, because there were certainly some folks who said, you know what, it's better if the law just fails, Chris Gwynn will fail, and then we'll get something when a new mayor comes. And our feeling was, we need as strong a bill as we can get now so that the new mayor is forced a little bit to make it even better, as opposed to getting nothing now. And then theoretically, Mayor de Blasio could have said, if we had nothing, he could have said 15 or more was, a victory. So it was definitely a challenging moment.
That's right.
And Emma, would you say, sort of from the communications perspective, was there an outside moment? Was there a particular message or sort of moment when you felt like, okay, from a coalition building perspective, like this is when the tide really turned for this campaign?
Yes.
I'd say there are two moments that come to mind. First of all, the New York Times story on women's support. I think that was yes, which led to the paper hadn't covered the campaign in years, and we had good press coverage, but a Times story was something that would elevate this to the next level, and it was something that we hadn't had in a long time. And so we had this great letter signed by 200 women, prominent women leaders, Gloria Steinem and another activist, Ai-jen Poo, Jennifer Buffett, women who were donors and philanthropists, saying that they were asking Speaker Quinn to support this issue and saying that it was important to them and something that they were going to stake their support on. So we were able to get this great story in the New York Times from Kate Taylor, and it sort of changed the game in a big way, and it led to the paper writing another great piece on women's support again. And this was a time when the importance of the women's vote was being talked about a lot. And of course, because this was an electoral issue of who are women going to vote for. And the paper ended up editorializing 3 times. And it was a moment where we were not only able to say that these 200 women support this, but that we have a plan to mobilize women across the city to educate them about this issue, to make sure that they are staking their vote on it. And I think the second issue I would point to is, as Gale mentioned, the swine flu, H1N1. People were thinking about, people were thinking about who was getting sick and where they were getting sick and were you going to get sick. So if the person making your sandwich at the deli has the swine flu because they can't afford to take a day off, or if the child sitting next to your child has the flu because her parent can't take the day off, then that's something that affects you directly in a way that maybe not having paid sick days didn't before. So we were able to hold yet another press conference, as Gale alluded to. We were out on the steps of City Hall in every type of weather, in many, many times a year. And we had people standing out there in surgical masks. We had Jeremy, our germ puppet, and that...
He got real, or she got real germy after a while.
Yeah, Jeremy was very germy. But we had the steps full of people, and the Associated Press ran a story on it that was everywhere. And this picture of people in surgical masks standing on the steps saying, "We need paid sick days. This is a public health concern." That was a big deal, and it ended up, taking a good story and making it into a bigger moment involves keeping the conversation going. So we were able to, then get TV involved, get it on the Today Show, get it on the nightly news, and keep the conversation going about this at a time when people were really thinking about public health.
If I could just, in terms of the timing, though, I just want to make the point that was early. The New York Times, the women's letter, I think, was really critical, and I can't say enough about Gloria Steinem and how she stepped up. And because of identity politics, the speaker, who's we knew only concern was really becoming mayor, really wanted Gloria's endorsement. And having the women's letter, this was in 2012, I'm sorry, the summer of 2012, having Gloria say, and she did say, "I will not support you." She said this publicly, it was in the article, "unless you support paid sick days."
We didn't know she was going to say
That was so important, and it became news. And we had been trying to get the Times to cover this. I mean, we did have good coverage especially from El Diario. They were wonderful because Hispanics in the city really did not. The 80% didn't have paid sick time. They were great. A lot of the ethnic press was wonderful. But the Times, we knew we needed the Times. And having Gloria do that just made an enormous difference. And having that women's letter, kind of making it a women's issue and making, Chris, who wanted to be the first woman mayor, realize that this was really going to intersect with her campaign. I think that was, to me, that was a huge turning point. And I remember, yes, I was in Rome with my family in the bathroom, and they were trying to sleep when we were negotiating. But I also remember I was at Yankee Stadium talking to the New York Times editorial staff in August of 2012 when they were really trying to put together this editorial. And that was a turning point, too, because the speaker really wanted their endorsement. So the media was great. The media was important, but having a good champion like Gloria was really important too.
Great. So I want to make sure we have time for questions. And Gale, I know
I'm okay for
we need to get Michelle Obama or the Secret Service to be coming after me for an event you have later. But just looking back, we talked a little at the beginning about this was a great moment, but how much of this campaign do you think was unique to paid sick leave versus how much of sort of what you guys went through is applicable to legislation more generally?
So can I think it's incredibly applicable to legislation more generally, and I actually think this campaign had a huge impact on the ability to pass legislation moving forward. Like, if it were not for the paid sick leave campaign, the Community Safety Act, which was the legislation to reform and amend stop and frisk in New York City, would never have passed, because the paid sick leave campaign gave courage to council members who were pushing against the speaker, and courage to community organizations to realize that they could win against the opposition of legislative leadership, and the mayor. And it radically altered, I think, people's expectations around what could pass in the New York City Council, and led to the rules changes, the progressive speakership, and election of Melissa Mark Viverito. Like, the whole thing, I think, radically was changed by the paid sick leave campaign. And so I think it is a phenomenal case study and could be applied to really any issue that could capture the public's imagination. So
I just want to add that, to the credit of Sherry and her staff, the content and the substance was many years and months in the making, and that is as important as the actual passage. That doesn't always happen. There are a couple of glitches, but they are minor compared to what would have happened if we didn't have months and months of discussion. So substance is, as a policy wonk, and we all are, that was as important.
Sherry or Emma, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. But we also had, I want to give credit to Nancy Rankin at the Community Service Society, who also did a lot of research. I mean, those meetings with the city council members, we went in equipped with each of their districts, how many people didn't have paid sick time. I think that was really effective. So I think, having a lot of the public health data was important, having data from other places that had enacted paid sick time. So yeah, I think the substance was, I think having the facts was good. And I think developing the policy around, and we developed a lot of the policy also around those conversations we had with people on the ground, which is really important. That was part of the coalition politics. I think the interaction of, with labor, with even with business, and with Make the Roads people, gave us a real perspective on what we needed and how we needed to do it.
And I think passing paid sick days in New York City sets a huge precedent for the rest of the country. Yeah. This is the biggest city to pass paid sick days. It's a very good bill, to the credit of these women here. And, we were able to point to San Francisco as a great example, another metropolitan city, especially in the press, when we were combating a lot of skepticism about whether this was going to hurt businesses. Of course, we had the business lobby out there saying this is a no-go, this is going to drive businesses out, this is going to hurt businesses, and we were able to say, among many facts that we had at our disposal about how this was not in fact going to hurt businesses, we had the example of San Francisco where, a lot of people who had come out against the law had now said publicly, actually, this was a great policy for a low cost. Businesses were thriving there. They were being rated a top place to do business. They were outperforming, counties around them in terms of business. So I think having the example of paid sick days in New York for the rest of the country is huge. And this has been implemented for a year. It's going very well. And I'm hopeful that it's spreading momentum across the country. We see the White House now touring the country, talking about, lead on leave, lead on paid sick days. We have, like I said, last year, nine cities in 2 states passing laws. We have elected officials changing their stance on this all the time. I think this has set an incredible precedent, and it's only going to continue.
I remember one funny story at some hearing. I was told San Francisco is not a city. So, we dealt with that. But one other aspect of implementation that I think set another precedent, because I hear about it, is that we went to the district office of all 51 council members. We actually went to their office and to every business. We went to the restaurants, we went to the delis, we went to the chambers, we went to Staten Island, we went everywhere, because the notion is we're serious about this, we're serious about the substance. You don't have to come to us, we'll go to you. And to pick up on what Allison said, recently, I don't know, there's another slightly controversial topic. I can't remember what I'm doing anymore. But some topic, and we've been going back to the businesses. Oh, Gale, she goes to us. She comes to us. She came to us on paid sick days. We didn't agree with her, but she came to us. So it's back to what you're saying, is that we kind of set a precedent. Like, you have to work with people. Sherry then took the information about the business's concern. We tried to address it. But the fact that you reach out and go to them when they're in opposition makes a big difference.
Great. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Can we have a round of applause for our panelists, please? And if any members of the audience have any questions, if you could please come up to the mic on the side here, would be great.
Don't be shy.
Hi. Hi, my name is Vincent. I'm a first-year MPA student. First of all, thank you for taking the time to come and share experience and knowledge with us. It was really fascinating and really interesting just to learn a practical application of everything that we learn in school and how it's actually implemented. So my question was, achieving paid sick leave in New York City was a huge, huge victory. Going back, do you think there's anything that you would have done differently during this entire process, and what key recommendations do you have for other policymakers in different cities who might be looking to implement something similar?
Why are you looking at me? I think in some ways there were 2 phases to this campaign, which is why, I said that about, because the H1N1 was in the first phase, so that was earlier on. We came very close to doing this in 2010, which is so it's very interesting to hear Allison say that about when the speaker approached them, because in 2010, the offer was also on the table, I'll do this, as they did it in Connecticut. And I think, and we said no, and that was the end of it. And that was the end of it for about a year. I mean, there was, we did stuff during that year, but it was really kind of only like a year later when we started to really think about this more as a political issue. And I think that was really important. And I think listening to people like Allison, listening to people really in the Working Families Party who had a little more political expertise, I think that really helped, and I think we probably should have been a little more flexible a little earlier on that. But, also a lot of this had to do with momentum around the country, and so it became less of a radical thing to be doing, and I think that was helpful. But I think keeping in mind the politics is just really important. I'm more of a wonk, as you might know. Yeah, I'm a lawyer. But I think really having a political view. Not that we didn't try really hard to move the speaker in that way, but I think that's my takeaway on it.
So I spend a lot of my time sort of training our members on political power, and staff and I always say that in the places where we have political power, if we run the perfect campaign, we have a 95% chance of winning. That's my sort of definition of having power. And in some ways, I actually think paid sick leave was, at least the second phase, which I was a part of, it was the perfect campaign in some ways. Like, nothing's perfect. You can always do things better. But it had the right combination of pure politics, communications, substance, inside, outside. It really did. And I think that's what we can learn from, is understanding that. Because I do want to reiterate, I'm not the policy wonk of the bunch, but having the substance in the legislation was crucially important. And the fights we had at the end, we had framework agreements, but in the end, the fights were about, is that going to be an and or an or in the legislation? Because it's a huge difference between the word and or in a piece of legislation, right? And who it impacts. Or we didn't discuss one thing, we didn't discuss domestic workers. Domestic workers were in the original bill, and when we negotiated with the Speaker's office, it just didn't come up in the negotiations and the things we were fighting for. So the Speaker's staff's position was it didn't come up, so therefore it wasn't important to us. Our position was it didn't come up, so we assumed it was left whole. And after we had come to an entire agreement, we'd announced the framework agreement, we had to go back and fight again to make sure domestic workers were covered.
Damn right.
And so, so I think that you have to have equal balance between this. You can't forget the substance. And I know sometimes I get caught up, and my folks, the political folks, get caught up with, like, the win. Being able to announce a win is more important than the substance of the win. And one lesson I would say is that if the substance isn't right, then you can announce whatever you want, but it's not actually a win.
I'd say from a communications perspective, learning that a bill is a bill until you put a human face on it, and that's what connects with people. You can talk about homeless policy, but then you see Dasani in the New York Times, and you see the face of a girl who, lives a few blocks from your daughter. You can talk about paid sick days, but when people see that this is, a working parent, that this is impacting children, when they see those faces and those voices, we're seeing this, we also work on the Fight for 15. You say McDonald's workers, people think one thing, but if you show people in their homes, if you talk to them about their lives, you see their faces, it's very different. So making an issue real for people with the powerful tool of the media and faces and voices of people who are going to be impacted by this bill was a huge part of the campaign, and I think is a lesson to learn going forward.
Hi, my name is Harpreet. I'm a second-year MPA student here. Thank you for coming to the panel. This was really interesting. I had a question about Sherry, you talked about how you spent a year answering questions to the speaker's legal team. I just had a question about, like, can you summarize what their concerns were, and as well as what is the legal basis for this law? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we work in a lot because municipalities tend to be more progressive than states, and so a lot of new social ideas you can do in municipalities that you're not going to be able to pass right away on the state level. So most states have some form of home rule that municipalities have, and it's called the polis has the power to legislate under the police power on health and safety issues. And that's why I think we do have the power here in New York and in most places where there's home rule, and that's in most states in the union, to legislate on sick days, because you can make the argument that it does have to do with health and safety. In New York City, unfortunately, in New York State generally, there is a case that says that you can't have local minimum wage, that has to be done at the state level. So that's been interpreted to mean that almost anything that has to do with wages you can't legislate on. So I think the council legal staff was concerned about that. They were concerned about a number of things that had to do with that lawsuit. They were also concerned because they were very proud of the fact that they had passed something that required city contractors to cover LGBT families on their health insurance. They had passed that in the city council, and the New York Court of Appeals had struck it down on the basis that contractors have to be, the only thing that contractors can be chosen upon is their low bid. So they were just concerned about the implications of those cases. There's a whole bunch of cases. So we had to kind of go back and forth on that. And then there were details in the law that they were concerned about. I mean, there were, including domestic workers. So there were a lot of things that, just details that, we thought we'd already answered, and then we'd have to answer them again. And we kind of felt like that was probably somewhat a stalling tactic to make sure that, because I don't think the speaker really wanted to confront this, because ultimately it was her undoing, and she was probably right to not to want to do it. So if she could have said, no, we can't do it legally, I think she would have been very happy. So I think that was one reason that we ended up spending 9 months doing that. But yeah, was that? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Joanna. I'm a first-year student here at SEPA, and I study both urban policy and gender equity policy. So my question is sort of specific. You've sort of alluded to this and talked about the women's letter and domestic workers. I see paid sick leave as a big issue for women workers. Women are primarily the caregivers in their families, so it's not just when they're sick, but when their child's sick or a relative sick, often the woman needs to take off time to assist. So do you see paid sick leave having any implications for other family-friendly, women-friendly work policies or parental leave, or do you think this can be leveraged for policies for women at work?
So, yes.
Yes. That's what we're all trying to do. I mean, really.
I think if you see where the president is now on paid family leave, I think that's a direct result of the work that's been done nationally to pass paid sick leave policies, because it went from paid sick being sort of like this super lefty progressive idea to a litmus test for all Democrats. It feels like all Democrats now have to support paid sick leave. And then the only natural next step is broader parental leave policies, paid family leave. And, the President Valerie Jarrett from the White House is now, and Labor Secretary Tom Perez are now touring the country in support of paid sick leave and paid family leave laws. And so I think that's a direct result of these campaigns.
Absolutely.
Hi, my name's Alyssa. I'm a second-year student graduating in a couple of weeks. I'm curious about the coalition building process to make this a really successful campaign. In particular, I guess I'm curious about, was it always imagined to be a large coalition that would have to back this to make it successful? How did the process of including people over the timeline change? And were there kind of internal coalition politics about making decisions, speaking for people, who would show up in public events, all of that? I'm curious your insights.
Yes, there definitely. I mean, there are always coalition politics. I'm beginning to realize this as I'm working around the country, because I think you think when you're, because we were definitely deepest in New York, around the country. I'm just the legal advisor. And, you know, a state which will remain unnamed, I had someone, like, just recently, right? I saw somebody, I had to, like put my arms around, she was crying, sobbing over the coalition politics. And then I talked to the person who was on the other side of the fights that were going on, and she gave me this whole diatribe about how mean girls are always mean girls, they don't change after adolescence. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't even want to know what's going on. I'm just the legal advisor, but I just pat everybody on the back. So there are always coalition politics, always. I think it's like important. It's really important to have an inclusive coalition that includes the voices of low-income workers. I really believe that. That's something we always say, but after the experience here in New York, I totally believe it. It's also important to think about, like, who's going to be important in terms of the political levers. It's important who's going to really make a difference in terms of communications. Public health was really important. Labor was essential in this movement, and it is in almost every state we're working in, every city. So, you know, so you're bringing together some pretty diverse voices, and women's rights is, you know, totally. And so you have to expect that there are going to be tensions, and people have different ways of working and dealing with power. And I think, you know, in some ways it's, you know, it can be very upsetting, and it, you know, but I think we in the end, and Allison can tell me if she agrees, I think we did a pretty good job of making sure that the coalition was on board, but that we also could get a bill. So
I totally agree with everything that Sherry just said, and I just want to tell one story that I don't know if Sherry even knows. So my husband ran the Paid Sick Days campaign in Connecticut, and then he works for the Working Families Party and was organizing the New York City Paid Sick campaign for a period of time. And when we moved in together before we got married, we were living together for about 2 weeks, and at breakfast he sat me down and he said, Allie, we need to talk about something. And I was like, okay. And he said, if 32BJ is going to sell us out on paid sick leave to endorse Chris Quinn, I need to know right now, because I take my campaigns really seriously. And I was like, good morning to you. But the dynamics were, it was like, but that was the reality. There was, and in all of the places, and in the state, Sherry was mentioning, where everybody is crying on all sides, the coalition dynamics are really complicated, and but they're also really important. And so I think you think of yourself, I think of myself as an organizer, and the internal organizing to make sure that sort of a coalition is moving as much in lockstep as possible is as important as the external organizing, because if you guys are fighting against each other, you're going to spend way more energy fighting against each other in the power plays and whatever than you are actually passing legislation.
Similarly with communications, there's a lot of internal communications that has to be kept up in order for things to run smoothly. Alyssa was an intern of mine, by the way, so she knows a little bit about this. But you have to be willing to have lots of phone calls. Everything needs to be discussed. Everything needs to be run through everyone. Long editing processes, lots of quotes in your press releases. But in the end, if, like Allison said, if you're communicating externally in an excellent way, but you're not communicating internally among coalition members, you're not making everyone feel like they're heard, everyone feel like they're getting their moment in the sun in the press, that their constituencies are not being properly represented, then it can crumble internally, and all of your outside press work will be for naught.
Hi, my name is Farai. Could you talk a bit about the relationship that you form with whatever legislators or politicians who you think could be helpful? So, for example, you mentioned your relationship with Christy Quinn. And in my case, I'm working for a nonprofit, dealing with the homeless policy. And very often, I feel like, maybe senior officials have relationships with whoever is in politics enough that maybe they cannot, piss them off, or they have to maintain some degree of civility in a way that sometimes, could be counterproductive because I consider myself more on the community organizing, and, sometimes I feel like you might need to, have people show up at a rally and not be so nice at them. But so the politics of trying to sort of maintain relationships. Can you talk about, how close, it is recommended, whether, for example, your relationship with Quinn ended up, being for the best or might have compromised. But in general, can you just address this issue of,
Sure. So I always joke that I think there are like two truths in politics. One, politicians are not your friends, with some exceptions, and with all respect to Gale, because, two, it's better to be feared than to be liked. I think that's a really important truth that, and we talked about this, like paid sick is a phenomenal idea, or high-speed rail is a phenomenal idea, but if there's nobody that a politician sort of like sees could defeat them, quite honestly, or could help them or harm them, then who cares? And because in the end, politicians' number one priority is getting themselves reelected. They could be super progressive and really good on the issues and really good on the substance, but they still have to get reelected every couple of years. And so I think that understanding that is really important. And so creating the conditions that a politician says, this helps me get reelected or get my next job or whatever, instead of either this hurts me or this is neutral. And neutral you could sort of work with, but you want people to say this helps me. And so you sort of have to make that case and build a relationship. And so I do think that in part of the piece, going back to the coalition question, having folks who have the ability, who aren't just C3, and have the ability to get involved in elections as key partners in coalitions is just really important, because the C3 structure is really limited, and in the end, somebody like Chris Quinn in particular needs to see that there are people who care about the issue that actually can have an impact on her future.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I also, and that is definitely a lesson learned for me in this campaign, but I would also just say it also is not a great idea to really piss people off who you might need later, and that's something.
I agree with that too.
Gale leave? Yeah, I guess Gale had to get. But I learned that from Gale as well. I mean, she really got along with everybody on the city council, and they all respected her, and that was one thing that we had that really was a positive for us. So I think it's both, but I think you do have to keep that in mind, because you might need people later for the next campaign or for for other things. And if people are really angry with you, then that's not good either. So.
And that's something to keep in mind with messaging as well. Is when do you pivot to being negative? Is to start, you need to give people room to be champions of the issue, even if they're not yet. You need to say, we're urging you to support this. Thank you for your support. We're urging you to do more. Allow people room to take that up and not slam them. And then at some point, you have to make the calculation of, okay, when do we shift our tone in our messaging to, something more negative or something more pointed? If you feel like that door to kind of, the door that you've left open is now closed, and that's a calculation that you need to make in a messaging perspective as well.
And I also think you have to be willing to to hold a politician up as the winner in the end, and celebrate them if they do the right thing, even if it took too long for them to do the right thing, right? So when we were with Chris Quinn, when we announced the deal, the entire coalition stood with her to announce the deal and celebrate her, because you can't force somebody to do something and then turn around when they go to announce it and say, oh, you suck, right? Like, you have to actually, politicians are human. I mean, they might not be your friends, but they are human beings, and so you have to maintain a human relationship.
All right, I think we're going to have to leave it there. So thank you, everyone, so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Thank you again to our panelists.
Did I ever tell you that story about Joanna?